Okay, so I am at Prospect Cemetery, and it's the best place I could find to do a video, since the park was packed with people running around and doing their things. So I just watched a video on YouTube, and it's posted on Spiralvent in case you want to watch it. But this guy had a PhD in philosophy, and he kind of broke down David Benatar's um, asymmetry quadrant in understandable terms, and I totally saw his argument. But like I said, he had a PhD in philosophy, and maybe there's some things I'm missing. I tend to think sort of on the top layer at this point anyway, and there's lots of little arguments for antinatalism that I'm still kind of sifting through and understanding the details of. So going back to the asymmetry thing, I think his end result was basically saying that David Benatar was using a counterfactual in quadrant 3 of his asymmetry chart that was not applied to the rest of the quadrants in the same chart. And where that led him to was basically giving the same treatment to quadrant 3 and 4 when it comes to non-existence of anybody, and having that give a neutral or zero value so that there is no asymmetry on that side of non-existence compared to the side of existence. Well, I would have to say that I don't believe that quadrant 3 was necessarily counterfactual, and I think David Benatar addressed this in his chapter dedicated to is there ever harm coming into existence, and he goes into the non-identity problem as well. In that sense, if you consider that persons that do not exist would be harmed if they come into existence, then you could say that it's not really a counterfactual, it's a factual, or it's a fact that coming into existence is harm. And I think David Benatar goes in on length to explain how coming into existence is harm, whether you're, say, disabled or will suffer any environmental deficits or harms by being born. So in that sense, I don't agree with the PhD guy making the claim on YouTube. I still think David Benatar's arguments hold water, and I still do think antinatalism is a good way to think. I've seen other YouTubers and Facebookers basically kind of roll their eyes at the asymmetry argument, like, oh my God, this again. So in that sense, I'm kind of understanding it the way the whole counter argument against asymmetry as being somewhat of an extraneous thing, or maybe a redundant thing that has been argued for over and over again. Especially by David Benatar in YouTube videos and his writings and other media events like radio show interviews and things like that. So, but I still find it interesting to get where I mean, on the get go, I just find antinatalism to just make so much sense that I feel that if I look at videos that explain counter arguments well, I make myself stronger in my understanding of the whole philosophy. Um, so that's essentially what I want to say. And as a by the way, I was also listening to another David Benatar interview, and I forget where it was from, but it doesn't matter too much because he said this on multiple interviews, and you can find it on YouTube as well. But it was brought up that for some people, antinatalism doesn't make sense because it focuses so much on pain and pleasure, which I believe is true. I think anything we do in this life is basically an act against pain, against suffering. And some people have brought up the idea, though, that life is more than just pain and pleasure. It might have to do with things like the acquisition of knowledge. And you can see where I'm going with this, knowledge, kind of pleasure and knowledge, and anyway, whatever. But I think when it comes to knowledge too, I stick with David Benatar on this one as well, because I feel as a race, as a species, human beings are limited in multiple ways and in extraordinary ways when you consider the universe and what's out there, what's to be known, even on a terrestrial level. We just have no capacity to understand everything in the world. I mean, there's 7.7 billion people on the earth right now, and no one person knows all that much compared to what is out there to be known. We just don't have that capacity. And then, forget even talking about space exploration in the universe in general, and made even more complicated by the fact that there might, not the fact, but the possibility that there's other sentient uh, 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 beings out there. So that's essentially where I want to come down on. Um, well, come down in two different ways. I want to come down on the fact that I just want to reiterate that human beings have very limited capacity to experience the world for what it is. I don't think, for as far as we could go in the direction of developing technology and measuring instruments and all that stuff, we remain very limited. And I feel by the time you start talking about human beings that can go beyond those capacities that we currently have, despite our evolution and technology and all that stuff, I think you'll be talking about a species that is not human anymore. And is that worth waiting through all this stuff to become that species? And even if you become a species that is not human anymore and that has attained this kind of, as Yuval Noah Harari quotes, um, this uh, Homo Deus status, I mean, what would be the point of that? I think there would still be a large philosophical question looming as to like what would be the point of being godlike. What would be the point? Anyway, so I'm gonna end the video there, and yeah, talk to you later. Bye.